Welcome to the Smith and Rowland Show. Let's join our host, Alan Smith and Jeff Rowland.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen and fans around the world. It's time for another thrilling episode of the Smith and Rowland Show, the Unplugged edition, where we just present the unplugged truth, the unadulterated truth, the uncontroversial truth, because we're not people of controversy. And
That's
I want to welcome the one who I keep in the middle of the stream, Alan Smith.
Yeah, here I am. Yep, I got my little waders on, got my little life vest, got my little floaties on. I'm in the middle of the stream, head above water, and I have come here today to bring you.
Wait a minute. Hold on. Head above water. Is your head really above water? Come on.
Not really. I thought I'd throw that in there. Listen, Mr. Rowland, we got an article here, which is a very interesting article. It's by James Hickman, and the title of it is 5 Predictions for the Coming Decade of Decline. Wow. 5 predictions for the coming decade of decline. It seems to me it's perhaps already started. But the first paragraph is, there is a well-known modern proverb, often attributed to the novelist of G. Michael Hopfer, that goes, weak men create hard times create strong men create good times, and good times create weak men. Where do you think we are in that cycle, Mr. Rowland, pastor, preacher, truck driver?
Heavy on the truck driver. I used to tell people that I was a preacher that drives a truck. I now am dangerously close to being a truck driver that used to preach. But I will say that in the scope of that proverb, which, by the way, you could preach that proverb till Jesus comes back and never exhaust it, because I believe it's full of Bible truth. We are in a time where we're coming out of a time where America was so strong that those good times that we enjoyed has created weak men. And as a result of it, we have weak leadership. I am consumed with the next paragraph under that statement, Alan, that says the saying sums up the cyclical nature of the rise and fall of societies. And it's a topic in which this writer has tremendous personal interest. And in just saying that, it is cyclical in nature. Weak men create hard times. Right. But hard times create strong men. The only way to survive a hard time is to become strong. And strong men will then create good times. And then good times ends up creating an apathetic, weak style of living your life. And I think that's where we're at. We're in the last segment of that proverb now.
Well, I think there's no doubt about it. But there's, that's encouraging and it's discouraging all at the same time.
Yeah, that's right.
Because, I mean, it gives us a diagnosis of where we are. Yeah. And it also gives us a cure on how to get out of where we are.
Well, it does. And can I just point one thing out, that if this proverb has any truth to it, and it's cyclical, when you get to good times that we've come through in our nation, some people call the 20th century the century of America. And I would have to agree with that. Our economy ruled the world, really, and was the envy of the world. Our military was the strongest of any military in the world. Our stand was stronger than any country in the world. But that's no longer true. You can't say those things now in the 21st century. So the good times we've come through, it created weak men. And this is the problem. It goes back to the first statement. Weak men then create hard times. So we're in this segment of time. And I'd love for you to comment on this part. If, in fact, good times have created weak people in America, and you tell the weak people hard times are coming, they don't want to hear that because they're too weak to hear it. But it's inevitable. Weak men will create hard times.
Well, weak men have weak ears. That's part of being a weak man.
Yeah, that's right.
So you can't hear. You're weak. You can't hear the truth. You're weak. Yeah. And if you're weak in your hearing, then you have no hope. And not only that, if times are good, the way the human psyche works, Jeff, is your thinking is always in a comparison of two extremes, what's real bad and what's real good. What makes your life real good is because you've had a bad day.
That's right. That's right.
So we work in comparisons. When times are good, those kids and people that we raise up in good times do not have bad times to compare them with.
Right.
And I had somebody in my family, and the daughter was going to get married, and they talked to me about this guy that she was possibly going to marry. Yeah. And here's what they said to me. I said, well, what's his background? What's his family? And it was, well, he come out of, his father's an alcoholic and they've had hard times. And he had to go to work when he was 14 to help, buy groceries and stuff just for the family. And I said, marry him. That's a good one right there.
Yeah.
I said, because he's not been ruined by the good times. Now,
That's
Jeff,
right.
it's pretty bad. I was really serious. It's pretty bad when you take somebody that's raised in hard times. Now, the truth is, I was raised in pretty hard times. You was raised in pretty hard times. We both had to raise ourselves a whole lot, not for different reasons, but nonetheless, that creates what we call you had to grow up early.
That's right.
Right. You had to grow up. And then everybody says, well, they don't need to let them be a teenager. Well, my daddy said to me, now, son, we don't do teenage years.
Yeah, that's right.
That was
that's
my
exactly
little
right.
speech when I was 13.
That's
Son, our
mine
family
too,
doesn't.
buddy.
Our
Mine
family
too.
doesn't do
Yeah.
teenager. So I went from a boy at 12 to 13 to a man. But my point is to come out of I don't mind. To me today, Jeff, we got a lot of weak men, and everybody will give testimony to that. We got some strong men too. We got a lot of men. Now, the problem with that is if you could go ahead and it truly rotate back into the next part, weak men create hard times and hard times create strong men. Well, the problem is when the weak men are creating the times, the problem is the enemy can take you over.
That's right.
If we didn't have an alligator or an enemy out here laying to take us over, but it's waiting, you got the enemy is out here waiting for the weak men, the weak times. And so we can look around in our own country and see that the society has purposely and our government trying to weaken men so that we can be taken over. And some of my biggest problem, Jeff, and I'll be honest with you, is when our military has went woke. I'm like, I haven't not reconciled that in my mind yet. I don't know what you've done with it, but
well, it's made it hard for me to. I am proud of serving our country at the time that I did, but at this point, I would not. I even had a discussion with my son about this. Me and my son both served, and my son-in-law is now close to retirement from the Air Force.
Yeah.
And I've talked with both my son and my son-in-law, and to be honest with you, I would not recommend serving to my grandchildren. And because of what you're saying. And I got to tell you, that's a sobering thought when you get to that point. And think about this, Al. We're creating a weak military because of woke philosophy at a time when we're being invaded on the southern border. I woke up this morning and turned on the news, and there was 3 reports that's just happened in the last couple of days of murders and rapes from known gotaways at the southern border on 13 and 12-year-old children.
Oh, my goodness.
And I'm just saying that no one's taking that seriously. No one is. As a matter of fact, the policy on the left is to open the borders and let anyone come in for any reason at any time. That's what they really want, is they want open borders. They say they don't, but they want open borders. When we're told that our border is secure when 7 million people have crossed it in the last 3 years, then there's a problem. And that 7 million that has crossed it in 3 years is just the ones we know about. It's the ones we don't know about that pose the biggest problem.
Well, it's like the tip of an iceberg. There's more that you're not seeing than what you're seeing.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Let's go on to the next part of this article. You want to read that next?
Yeah, he goes on to say, and this is from the author's perspective, he says, having recently reached middle age, I can comfortably say with the benefit of hindsight that I was born and grew up during the American prime time, the time at which the wealthiest and most powerful country in the history of the world was at its peak. The U.S. is still an incredible country, he says, with so much prosperity and opportunity, but it would be completely naive and ignorant to claim that America is not in substantial decline. And I agree with him totally with that. Listen to how he frames this, Alan, and then we'll get into the meat of the article. But he says, its standing in the world, that is America's standing in the world, has waned. Much of it just over the past few years. It's hard for adversary nations to take you seriously when your president shakes hands with thin air and embassy employees in Kabul have to be evacuated by helicopter. Financial challenges keep piling up. from the insolvency of Social Security to the $35 trillion national debt to the inflation problem that just won't go away. He said, fortunately, America's decline began from a historically high peak. So even in its diminished state, it is still wealthy and powerful. And when I read that part, it rings true. I mean, everything he's saying rings true to me. And to see that where we are even right now, we're still a powerful nation. But look at how far we have fallen from where we was. And when you have somebody running for office that says, hey, I think it's a good idea to make America great again, and somehow that becomes a slogan that is demonized by people in America, I don't understand that. I don't understand the thinking of this lack of patriotism and someone it's almost like they're clamoring for weakness and hard times instead of just resting in the power of God for strength. And that seems to be where we're at.
Part of the trouble too, Jeff, I think, is in the how it's laid out here. I want to back up to a paragraph. It says the U.S. is still an incredible country with so much prosperity and opportunity. Now, nowhere there does it say the U.S. is still an incredible country because of so much integrity in Christian or spirit and character. So, you know what I'm saying? And so what's laid out here is prosperity and opportunity. If you go down to that other paragraph, it says, but the real concern isn't where the country is today. It's the trend where the country will end up in 10 years. Wait, let me back up right before that. Fortunately, America's decline began from a historically high peak. So even in its diminished state, again, it is still wealthy and powerful. So we got four words here, wealthy and powerful here. If you go back up to the top, it says prosperity and opportunity. There shows you your problem. When you're measuring off of how wealthy you are and how powerful you are and how much prosperity you've got and how much opportunity you've got. If that's your measuring stick, I just submit to the conversation here that if that is your measuring stick, you're totally measuring the wrong bucket.
I totally agree with you.
And there lies your problem.
Yeah, we're seeking for solutions in the wrong place.
And they're totally the wrong places.
Yeah.
And we still, you can get kind of here and be wealthy and be powerful and you can have much prosperity and opportunity. That sounds like the prosperity gospel to me.
Exactly.
And that's not biblically, that's not necessarily what we're striving for.
Well, don't you think that is a weak man's philosophy?
That is a weak man's philosophy right there.
Yeah, and it will create hard times. And I believe that. Alan, the writer goes on to say this he says, one of the best works on the subject I've ever read is The Collapse of Complex Societies by anthropologist Joseph Tainter. And then he says something here that I want you to listen to. He says, collapse is a strong word and conjures images of anarchy and death. But Tainter's definition is more precise. Collapse doesn't mean that a society or nation ceases to exist, but that it experiences a steep decline in political, social, and economic stability. And he goes on to say that's what he believes that America is facing. He draws the analogy from the book of Joseph Tainter of the decline throughout history from ancient Mesopotamia to Western Rome. And his analysis shows that one of the key culprits in collapse is the inability of a government to recognize problems or to solve them. And I think that's what you're talking about when you say, okay, if we coin this as wealthy, powerful, and opportunity and prosperity, if those are the four elements, then we're failing to really recognize the real problem.
But see, even in our country today, we hear Christians all the time trying to say, let's, keep church and, separate from government and, separation church and state, yada, yada, yada. But listen, Jeff, you have to they're not recognizing the problem. Well, why do we recognize the problem? It's because we have the Holy Spirit of God within us that gives us the gumption to see the problem. We're not seeing the problem outside of our own selves. We'd be just like this. Right. We're nothing special except we have someone special within us that gives us the eyes to see the problem.
Alan, when we were coming through that time of prosperity that we grew up in, and that time of power, and that time of wealth, and that time of opportunity that you and I grew up in, there was something there that's not present today. The thing that we had then was we recognized that wealth and opportunity, that power and that blessing came as a result of our humility before the true and living God. And that was preached in pulpits. That was declared in churches. And then somehow we reached a point where that was no longer acceptable. In the state of Louisiana, they just passed a bill to where they can put posters of the 10 Commandments up in schools now. And it's coming under a lawsuit by the ACLU. And there is even some Christian organizations that is a part of that lawsuit against putting up the 10 Commandments in the classrooms. Now, I got to tell you, when you reach that point, then your vision is skewed to only prosperity, wealth, power, and the natural problems and the natural solutions that doesn't hit on the real problem and the real solution, which is a return to Jesus Christ. So I say amen to what you said. That's so true. But as a result of that, we are facing what I believe is a collapse. And
it's collapsing right before our very eyes.
It's collapsed. Absolutely.
His next paragraph says many, which amens are what we just said. In all honesty, I did not read ahead and see this, but it says many ancient Roman emperors were legendary for failing to recognize the horrible problems brought on by their policies and incompetence, inflation, invasion, and etc. So it's one thing to have a problem, Jeff. And there's another thing to have a self-inflicted problem. So to have a problem is everybody needs to get their heads. If you got a self-inflicted problem, somebody needs to slap your jaws and say, you just did this. You're creating this problem. And we all know most problems are created. They're not natural.
Yeah, that's right. They may have natural manifestations, but they're not natural problems. They're supernatural. No. That's exactly right. He goes on to cite that some of these problems. He talks about, he says, for example, the Social Security trustees publish a report each year stating plainly that the program is going to run out of money in 2033. But no one in Washington wants to talk about it. Joe Biden has even pledged to veto any efforts to reform the program. And what he's saying in this is he's saying, okay, here's a problem, and here's what they're doing about the problem. Some are refusing to even acknowledge there is a problem and are unwilling to do anything about the problem. And that becomes their policy. Their policy is we're not going to recognize any problems and we're not going to do anything about these problems. And somehow or another, that is garnering them support from the American people, which shows you how dark and deluded people's thinking has become. It is unbelievable to me that you can't even frame, okay, here's a problem, and get somebody to agree, yeah, that's a problem. It is unbelievable to me. He goes on to say Biden's top officials also repeat the bold-faced lie that the border is secure while actively encouraging illegal immigration. Federal government even sued Texas to stop the state from securing the border on its own. The people in charge demonize and defund police, decriminalize theft, and elect progressive prosecutors who let violent criminals go free. Now, he is citing facts. These are facts that's happening in our country. And no one wants to recognize that as a problem for some odd reason. Does that not absolutely blow your mind at the delusion that we're under?
Well, Jeff, I think we would both agree that the enemy the dark side has taken over our judges, people that are locally judges, infiltrated our state levels, and people like the Soros have been pretty successful in stacking the deck. But to me, the worst one is, and I'm not sure who did this. I mean, I can give the credit to the dark side, but I'm not sure what individuals have done it. But our greatest takeovers in the pulpits of our country.
Without any doubt at all.
Yeah, but let's talk about our pulpits.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I think that's the root of the whole thing.
Well, could we say, Jeff, that we both know that the colleges, universities, we believe is what has seeded all these young people in this woke mentality or philosophy or whatever, plus much other. So I guess the same thing happened in our pulpits.
Well, it is. We're fixing
in our universities.
Yeah, you and I are fixing to do a podcast on Fuller Theological Seminary. We're going to hit on that in the next few days, maybe Sunday, maybe a different time, but we're going to hit on that. And what's happening, there is a parallel. There's always a parallel. Just as the secular universities has promoted woke ideologies and progressive left mentality into the political system and the social structure of the country, the seminaries are doing the same thing in churches. They're putting preachers out there into pulpits that no longer believe the word of God, that are weak and watered down. And unfortunately, churches won't even look at someone who has a call of God to preach on their life unless they have been trained by these modern theological seminaries.
That's
Now,
right.
I got to tell you, there's a problem. And the church is just as darkened in their vision as the people in America are toward the politics. It is absolutely unbelievable to me how that a church can face a time where the biggest requirement that they have for their pastor is what school did he graduate from? It has nothing to do with the call of God on his life. Most of them, I'll guarantee you that a lot of pulpit committees don't even ask a pastor when he came to know Christ. They don't know what his doctrine is. They don't know what his walk is. And yet they'll hire him because he has a degree from a seminary or he fits a certain mold or package. And churches are no longer seeking God for who God wants them to have. And pulpits are now flooded with these seminary graduates. And Alan, it's destroying the fabric of the church in America. That's happening.
I didn't mean to get us off on a side note there, but
it's
nonetheless, it's the same thing.
It's the same thing.
This article gets on into, where his view of this trend appears to be clear to him. And he starts off, he says, inflation is coming. Well, I say it's here. Wow. But he says inflation is coming. There's a little hope of responsible spending. The government's own projections forecast an extra $20 trillion of new debt over the coming decade. And frankly, that's optimistic. This is not good.
Think of that.
When the Fed created $5 trillion of new money during the pandemic, we got 9% inflation. How much inflation will 20+ trillion cause?
He's projecting this over the next 5 to 7 years.
Yeah. Then he goes into Social Security is not going to be there for you.
Think of that.
Wow. Inflation, he's saying the Social Security is not going to be there. Social Security is not a political problem. It's a arithmetic problem. And the math just doesn't add up. Oh,
that's right. That's right.
Every year, the U.S. Secretary of Treasury signs a report saying plainly that the 2033 Social Security trust funds will run out of money. Benefits will have to be permanently cut by 25% and then become worse over time. But, Jeff, you can't have everybody getting free money.
You can't.
Higher taxes are virtually guaranteed. This looks like it's going to be fun.
Look down to the next one. Continued social chaos. Every time it feels like the lack of civility and unity across Western civilization can't get any worse, something new erupts. The latest is university students screaming from the river to the sea and just stop all, while defacing artwork and public monuments. Rising tides of socialism and racial animosity never seem to ebb, and idiotic wokeness just won't go away. He said this is likely to continue to grow. This is where we're headed.
We could do a whole 10 podcasts on idiotic wokeness.
Yes,
but the only reason we don't is we don't want to contaminate anybody with that.
Yeah, well, I'm not the kind of person that calls people idiots. I'm just not. But I don't do that. I don't.
Well, I heard you one time. I heard you one time do it.
Most people that I've met are idiots. That's just the way.
Yeah,
that goes.
But y'all got to understand. I've walked with Jeff a long time, and he'll use the idiot word in the pulpit.
Which is why I'm no longer behind the sacred desk. Thank you very much. That's exactly right.
Well, there you go. Well,
hey,
Mr.
Alan,
Rowland,
let me just say this one last thing here. His last thing, and he said he kind of says it's most importantly major geopolitical disruptions. And that's what leads us into thinking about our eschatology and stuff. Yes. But he says that nations like China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran are likely to grow more assertive, and there will be significant calls to replace the dollar as the global reserve currency. And when I read that paragraph, it was odd to me. Just yesterday, Vladimir Putin, the leader of Russia, met with Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, and stirred up some strife, concerning South Korea, started making some calls. And we are seeing that. I mean, that's kind of what's happening. But he says that as a result of this, later on in the article, and I know we're running out of time here, but he says chaos is now the norm. And we can end there because that is true. Chaos is the norm now. And darkness seems to prevail over wisdom and godly thought. And we need to pray for our country and pray for the world. We need to pray for our country. And you know what? If calling forth a prayer vigil for our country causes someone to shy away, then I question whether or not their faith is truly in God to start with.
Okay, buddy.
All right, Alan.
Mr. Rowland, say bye.
Bye, world.
See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining today's Smith and Rowland Show. You can check out our website at kingdompropheticsociety.org and our daily Unplugged podcast at smithandrolandshow.podbean.com. You can also join us on Amazon, Apple, or Spotify.